Thank you for joining today's session. My name is Ridwan Haq. I'm a product line manager with the Desktop Product Marketing Organization here at VMware. So today we're going to talk about the business value of VMware View. What value can you extract when you deploy VMware View if you were to deploy it and measure it over a period of time? So this is a disclaimer that you have seen in every session. So I'm forced to show this to you. So basically, everything and anything that you hear, if there is any future or forward-looking statement, so that we are protected, we have to show that. So this is the bait. This is the abstract to get you guys into this session. So the reality is this is the summary of what we're going to talk about. What is the value? You know, what are the things that the analysts are saying? And, you know, what can you expect when you deploy a hosted virtual solution like VMware View? What are the infrastructure areas that you ought to be concerned about? What are the cost components of that? And at the end, how does it all come together and give you a lower total cost of ownership? So some market stats. What's happening in the market? We're seeing significant amount of interest in the CIO level for hosted virtual desktop. And this is a data that came out of Morgan Stanley's CIO survey. And as you can see from the chart, the interest has been growing steadily. What's interesting is this guy. 28% of the CIOs are looking at hosted virtual desktops, and which is essentially a representation of tenfold increase. So if you were to look at today's hosted virtual desktop market, it's about 2 to 3 million. That's the estimate of the hosted virtual desktop market environment today. In 2014, if you look at Gartner's estimate, if you look at IDC estimate, if you look at Forrester estimate, or financial analyst estimates, you're looking at about 20 to 30 million hosted virtual desktops in 2014. Some more stats. In fact, Goldman Sachs, based on their survey, or Morgan Stanley, based on their survey, approximately 25% of new PCs, they're saying that they could be virtualized. Now, that might be a little bit ambitious. You know, one out of every 4 new desktop, you have that as a hosted virtual desktop. Might be a little bit ambitious, but it does point to the sentiment towards hosted virtual desktop. People are looking at hosted virtual desktop for a couple of reasons. So right now there are external events that's happening, such as Windows 7 migration. So a lot of our customers are right now sitting on a refresh cycle, approaching a refresh cycle, and they have to make a big decision. I have to migrate to Windows 7 sooner or later. How do I do that? What is the most cost-effective way for me to migrate? So why are people so interested in hosted virtual desktop? We have seen where the market is heading, but it's important for us to understand why. Why are people driving towards hosted virtual desktop? It all boils down to a couple of things. On this side, you have cost elements. You know, you have CapEx, you have OpEx, and you have to be cognizant of how much does it cost you to support a traditional desktop, managed or somewhat managed or unmanaged desktop in a traditional environment. So at any given organization, you have a diverse set of devices. You have devices from different OEMs, different form factor, different driver requirements. You have different version of OS. You have different version of applications. Just to manage this diversity, just to manage this diverse set of devices and applications, that's a major challenge for any IT organization. And then you throw in the new class of devices, the converged devices. You have iPads. That's getting added to the mix. So it basically makes it even more challenging for IT organization. As a result, it flows into my operational expense. I have to spend more time in supporting the same number of users with diverse set of devices and applications. I may have to hire more people to meet my SLA that I have to the rest of the business units. So it cuts into my operational expense. And then there's this external factor, Windows 7 migration. We'll touch on this a little bit later in the presentation. And then the other factors are security. How do I ensure that I can extend a secure compute environment to my outsourced partners, the partners who are developing applications for us? How do I protect my IP in that process? And then finally, new initiative. This is not huge right now, but it's gaining some traction. It's all about how do I optimize my cost. When I get a new employee, my cost structure from a CapEx standpoint is to get a device for that employee. Then my OpEx is to make sure that devices has the right clock speed, the right configuration, right applications are loaded. All these things I have to do to get a new employee on board. So one of the initiatives that's happening is bring your own PC. So you bring in your own desktop. We will put an image, the corporate image, on top of your desktop so that you have a consistent corporate image that you can work off of. How many of you have seen this slide? Great. So we'll go through this real quick. There you go. So when we talk about value, it's important to understand what the value is. What do you measure? And more importantly, how do you measure it? So to understand that, we commissioned a study with IDC where they went and talked to 15 of VMware View customers, both in North America as well as EMEA. And these customers have had View in production for more than 1 year. That was our criteria in selecting those customers. Now the goal was to understand what these customers went through and what was the picture like before they deployed VMware View and how it's changed after they deployed VMware View. So these customers reported quite a few benefits of VMware View. And when we really think about it, we think that it can be categorized into two buckets, if you will. On this side, we have the business benefits, what we call a strategic value, or the qualifiable benefits. So these are the benefits associated with your data security, your IP protection, and things like that. The biggest challenge there is how do you put a dollar value next to it? It's priceless. So that's why what we have listed here is only those benefits, those are strategic in nature. Nonetheless, any and every organization wants it. So data security is one of them. Business continuity, business agility. How can you stay ahead of your competition? And which by definition means how can you be most productive in any given environment? And then finally, ability to spend more time on strategic projects. How many of you are in IT organization? Quite a few. How many to-do projects you carry always, that you have projects that you want to get to, but you never have time to get to? I see some hands as well. So this is what hosted virtual desktop essentially offers, that it frees up by optimizing, by standardizing your processes, it frees up IT time so that you can focus on strategic projects and get out of that maintenance mode where most of the time is spent today in a somewhat managed or unmanaged desktop environment. But then there's this side that we are all interested in. At the end of the day, how much money is it going to save us? What kind of efficiency can we expect out of that? So the usual suspects here are you have the CapEx related expense or savings. Then you have OpEx related savings in terms of when you streamline your operating process, when you streamline your desktop management, when you streamline your application deployment and lifecycle, what kind of savings can you have? Improved user productivity, when you can make sure that your desktops are always available, no matter where you are, no matter what device you're on. Your personal desktop with your applications, with your data, is always available to you. So that's where the worker productivity comes in. Finally, it's interesting that electricity saving, not a whole lot of customers actually look at electricity saving. But our analysis shows that if you had, let's say, 100 desktops, if you were to migrate to 100 thin clients and virtualize those desktops, you can, per desktop on an annual basis, you can save somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 to $60. So for 100 desktop, it will be 50 to 60 times 100. So there's significant amount of savings that can be extracted by switching to a thin client. And then greater IT efficiency we just talked about. So to calculate the value, we have to adopt some kind of framework. And for that, we turn to Gartner's TCO model. This is a methodology that Gartner started in late 80s, and it has evolved over time. But what we do is, in our definition, we take a very simplistic view of TCO. We look at the CapEx. In other words, that's the amount you spend in buying a hardware, be it a desktop, be it a laptop, be it a Mac, be it an iPad. That's your CapEx. And the OpEx, the amount you spend in supporting that device over its useful life. That gives us the total cost of ownership. Very simple term, but the key point here is we focus on only those activities that you can track, log, or are typically monitored as a part of your standard IT practice. So what's the cost of an average desktop? And it varies all over the map. I've seen customers claiming that their cost of desktop is $600. I've seen customers saying that it's $900. Some customers look at $1,000 desktop, $1,500 still. But the reality is you have a blend. You have a blend of PCs, you have a blend of Mac, and you have a blend of desktop, and you have a blend of laptop. They all have different price points. So just to create a baseline, we looked at Gartner's recommendation on the standard desktop configuration. Now, not every organization uses it, but we are using it as a baseline for our analysis, for our estimate as to what VMware View could save in terms of capital expense. And we will include that in our TCO calculation. So in our analysis, we took a simple average of $1,000 from the mainstream desktop. The next piece is the operational expense. So if you're in IT organization, this high-level life cycle is probably familiar to you. To roll out a desktop, you have to procure that desktop first. After you've procured the desktop, you have to do something to it. You have to make sure the configuration is right, the clock speed is what it says it should be, the memory configuration is right for your environment. You also have to put some asset tag to the desktop so that you can track it and things like that. Then you have to image. You have to create an image, load that image onto desktop. You have to make sure that you test all your applications that works in that image along with each other within that image. Then finally you deploy. After you deploy, you secure the desktop. You provide a secure mechanism for users to access the desktop. And then finally, when the time comes, you retire that desktop. Throughout this life cycle, what you're doing is you're managing that desktop. And that management takes some effort. It requires certain activities. And these activities would be hardware configuration and reconfiguration. That happens when you procure the desktop. User administration, when you're moving the users from one location to another, one office to another, or you're adding new users in your environment, or you are deprecating user rights based on whatever situation that you might have. You have desktop imaging and re-imaging that needs to be done on a regular basis. You have to patch applications. How many of you use Adobe Reader as a part of your standard image? That's one of those applications that are used everywhere. I used to work for Adobe. I used to work for Adobe, and I was in the reader group as well. So if you have noticed what Adobe has done in the last 13 months or so, every month they have released a security patch for Adobe Reader, because PDF is now one of the targets for malwares and viruses and things like that. So if you have Adobe Reader as a part of your standard package, standard image, you have to repackage that application about 10 times or 12 times if you were to take all these patches. Significant amount of effort on IT side. Application testing and provisioning. When you apply a patch, now you have to test that application, and you also have to test that application with other applications so that there is no shared DLL conflict, there is no shared resource conflict, and things like that. And then finally, the help desk. So that was the IT activities. The next is the operational expense. How much does it cost? So when IDC talked to our customers, they found out that the customers reported the cost, and we tried to bucketize, if you will, into three components. In IT organization, you have some high-value activities. You have some value-added activities that happens and that are typically done by system or desktop administrators. These are well-paid people, and of course their time is very valuable as well. And they typically do things like desktop imaging, re-imaging, access rights, writing policies, AD integration, and things like that, high-value activities. The second piece is the maintenance piece, the installing the applications, configuring the desktops, and delivering the desktop to the end users, maintaining the patches, managing the patches, and finally the help desk cost. So in a traditional environment, our customers reported on average they have a desktop administrator to user ratio roughly 1 to 200. Now, if you have a well-managed desktop environment, it's probably more. But this is an average of customers who have totally unmanaged desktop population and some customers who have somewhat managed desktops. If you look at Microsoft's ROI calculator that they have available online, you will see that for Windows 7 migration, you will see that their estimate of desktop administrator versus user is actually less than 200. So, that actually shows that our estimate here is a little bit more conservative than theirs. So anyway, so for on a 70K base for 1 to 200 user ratio, you're looking at roughly $350. Straightforward calculation. This is how much it costs me to support one user with high value-added activities that I do. The second level is roughly $90, and this is based on how much time do I spend in putting the patches up, making sure the applications are installed properly, deploying all these patches. If there's any if there's any policy that needs to be changed as a result of that, applying that policy, application entitlement, and things like that. And finally is the help desk. What was interesting is help desk. They were able to extract the exact data as of how much does it cost to support a user on an annual basis, both from the desk side support perspective as well as centralized desktop support perspective. So roughly $105 on average per user on the help desk, centralized support, and then on the desk side support, roughly $75. And that typically includes, when you have a desk side support call, that typically includes the travel time. The person has to come to your place, has to troubleshoot that physical computer. When you migrate to a hosted virtual desktop, and if you deploy a thin client, we'll see significant decrease in the help desk calls, mainly because of the stability of the hardware itself. There's no moving parts in a thin client. So the hardware itself is much more predictable. As a result, the call volumes that you'll get will be most likely related to applications. So that was the operational expense. And then you have this indirect cost. We talked about the productivity improvement. So indirect cost actually, this is a great example of indirect cost. This is something that we don't want to see because this cuts into our productivity. So what we did here is when we looked at the data that we got from IDC, it's a downtime cost, lost time on per user on an annual basis is roughly 6 hours. So that includes your application conflicts, the application denial of services, blue screen of death, all together. It's the time when the users are not productive. Help desk cost, this is associated with the line of business users. So I have a blue screen of death. Now 2 parties are actually paying for this. I'm picking up the phone and calling help desk. So I'm spending time on the help desk. IT is trying to help me. So there are 2 sides who are actually at work to resolve that issue. So help desk costs roughly $130 on an annual basis. Security costs, so this is virus removal, DLP type of solution that you may have in your organization. And then finally the startup costs. So this is the cost associated with getting a hardware, taking it to a certain location, setting it up, and being done for it until the refresh cycle hits again 4 years. So that's been amortized over a period of 4 years, roughly $20. So when we add up all these cost elements, we're looking at $340. So that's what we say is the indirect cost or the productivity cost in a traditional desktop environment. So now let's put it together. So how much does it cost me? What is my TCO for a traditional desktop? We know that we have to buy the device. We have established that's about $1,000, give or take a few. IT support, we looked at $620. That's an ongoing cost for me. Productivity cost, ongoing cost, again, $340. When we add all of these up, we get roughly $2,000. What that really means, it's not the whole TCO, it's just the beginning, because this includes the cost of acquisition of a desktop that you're going to use for 4 years and the cost for first year of operation. Over its useful life, you're looking at about $4,800. So that basically includes the capital expense that you paid one time and then the annual expense that you do over the next 4-year period. So the total cost of ownership is roughly $5,000. But the key takeaway for me is that every dollar I spend in a hardware, in a physical environment, I'm spending $3.8 to support that. And that's where VMware View Hosted Virtual Desktop helps. This is where my cost is. This is where my real cost is. Now, when you virtualize your desktop, it's not cheap. I'll be the first one to admit that. Just imagine, to replace a single desktop like this, you have to have the 6 components, and they all cost money. You have server, storage. If you don't have software assurance, Microsoft VDA license, or if you use thin client, which does not qualify for software assurance, you still have to pay Microsoft VDA license. Then you have to pay VMware View license. You can use a thin client or a zero client, which costs money, or you can repurpose your existing desktop, which doesn't cost you any money, just the conversion fee. So let's take a look at the server. So on average, based on the workload and based on the type of users in a given organization, we looked at what is the consolidation ratio that you can extract. How many VMs per core can you pack while maintaining the efficiency and the performance of your hosted virtual desktops? So on average, on a dual CPU quad-core configuration that basically gives you 8 core per box, you can pack approximately 10 VMs per core. This is on the conservative side. And this is based on a distribution of users where you have power users, certain percent of your population, you have structured task workers, and you have knowledge workers. And as you can see that the VM density is different because each of these users demand different type of CPU cycle as well as different amount of memory. So on average, the server cost, if we were to break it down on a per user basis over its useful life for 4 years, roughly $75. Now comes the storage. We could have a different session on storage by itself because storage is not only about capacity, it's also about performance. And you need to have a blend of both. It's not only I get X number of terabytes of data, I also want to make sure my IOPS, my storage is capable enough to support the IOPS that my user demand. The type of operations they do. Is it mostly read? Is it mostly write? And based on that, we basically do an estimate as to how much storage is required and what is the cost per VM. So using the same distribution of the users and with the estimate of read to write ratio of 80%. So essentially, you're writing more, or you're reading more. You get roughly based on a 20 gig image, and this could be your Windows XP image with some applications in there, with a user data of 5 gigabyte, where the users will be storing their documents, their Excel, PowerPoints, PST files, and things like that. And with an assumption that 70% of these users are on link clone, With this environment, you can see that the storage cost is roughly $75. Now, this represents a blend of SSD, so that you have a certain percentage of your storage is high-performance storage, and then you also have tiered storage, which is a lower-cost storage. So roughly $75. In the interest of time, I'll go a little bit fast here. So View license, the list price is $250 for View Premier. That gives you the license to the back-end ESX license as well, so which is included in here. So in other words, if you have a license for 1,000 users for VMware View, in order to host that 1,000 users, however many instances of vSphere you want to run, you have license to that, as long as those vSphere licenses are used for hosting hosted virtual desktops. Microsoft VDA license, that's an interesting one. So if you have software assurance, you basically don't have to pay the VDA license because it's covered by the software assurance. And for software assurance, you pay somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 to $40 on an annual basis. But if you don't have software assurance, then they have a list price of VDA or virtual desktop access. So that license fee is about $100. Imagine that you are using a thin client, which by definition cannot qualify for software assurance because it does not have Windows operating system in there. The same VDA license of $100 is applicable. Typically, people get discounts based on the volume and things like that. So nobody pays $100. But depending on your negotiation skill with Microsoft, you might be paying much lower than that. And then finally, thin client or zero client. If you purchase a new one, a lower-end thin client will be roughly $250. If you repurpose your existing desktop, that's an interesting one. A lot of customers are looking at it today, is taking out the hard drive from your existing desktop and through USB, booting into a SUSE Linux kind of environment, and then from there accessing their hosted virtual desktop. If you have software assurance, you actually don't pay anything because your software assurance covers the access rights to the hosted virtual desktop. So that's an interesting way of saving some money also. So to put things together on the CapEx standpoint, the acquisition cost of a traditional desktop and looking at the possibilities of a hosted virtual desktop, whether that is accessed by a thin client, whether it's accessed through a repurposed desktop, whether it's accessed through the desktop as is without even repurposing, it can range from $750 all the way down to $400. So, if you're buying a desktop for $1,000, $800, there is some savings there, not significant, but there's some savings in the CapEx. But the biggest savings actually comes from the operational expense. So the customers who deployed VMware View, before the deployment, they had an admin to user ratio of 1 to 200. After they deployed View, the same customers were able to support more users with less number of administrators. It actually changed from 1 to 400 for these customers. In fact, there are some customers who are able to get 1 to 800 or 1 to even 1,000 ratio for admin to user. So that basically brings down your cost per user on an annual basis. So that's the high-level IT activities. From install, config, and deploy or maintenance perspective, we also saw the significant amount of reduction in time spent per user on an annual basis. So roughly, cost per user is $50. And then finally, your help desk costs, roughly $90. You can see that desk side support came down significantly. That tells us that most of these customers' issues, desk side or dispatch support, was related to hardware. A bad sector in your hard drive can throw off, could generate significant amount of support calls. So with the thin client, they were able to actually address that. So roughly $290. And then finally, the indirect cost or the productivity cost, looking at the same areas, downtime, help desk, security, startup, roughly $110. So when we add up, before we actually add up, so where does this savings come from? Let's spend a little time in understanding that. And this is the data that actually were reported by our customers We just tried to put in a nice chart and graph so that it looks interesting. But the biggest savings, as you can see, that our customers reported was about 94%, and that was on the help desk support, desk side support. Dispatch support calls went down significantly after the deployed VMware View in conjunction with a thin client. Desktop imaging and reimaging. If you have a bad sector in your hard drive today, somebody has to come and reimage your desktop for you. With VMware View, it was as simple as going to a new machine and a new desktop is provisioned to you. In fact, one of our customers says that they can deploy a desktop within 8 minutes to anywhere in the world. So that was an interesting data point. User admin, move, add, change, and delete users, significant amount of savings there. So this is just to show you what our customers reported in these IT activities. And if you look at your call log in your IT organization, you're likely to find these activities there with certain numbers. So VMware View, cost of acquisition. So this basically includes the cost of a VM that accounts for my server, my storage, the VMware View license, the Microsoft VDA license. If I buy a thin client, that's included in here. So roughly, when you add up all these, roughly $1,000. So that's the cost of acquisition and operation for 1 year. But the total cost of ownership is a little bit higher because we are going to operate it for 4 years over its useful life. And we see that the total cost of ownership over its 4-year period is roughly $2,800. So what does that mean? Every dollar I spend to acquire a VM, I spend only $1.30 to support it over its useful life. Significant amount of savings. So to translate that into dollars, what does that really mean? How much money can I save per desktop on an annual basis? Roughly $500 based on our what our customers have reported, roughly $500. Some customers have actually been able to save even more, mainly because, number one, their desktop acquisition cost was higher than what we showed here, or their desktop operations cost was also higher before they deployed VMware View. So roughly $500 per desktop on an annual basis. Now, we touched on Windows 7, but we didn't spend too much time on Windows 7. How many of you are planning to migrate to Windows 7 anytime soon? Quite a few. So what are the steps you guys take when you migrate to Windows 7? What is your biggest concern when you think about Windows 7? Anyone? One concern, one biggest concern. Applications, right? Today, my business runs on critical applications today. Will it run tomorrow on Windows 7? That's the biggest concern of all the customers I talk to. And if you rewind what has happened in the last 10, 12 years or so, Windows XP has been around for about 10, 11 years now. And there's been a significant technology shift in the last 10, 11 years. We have seen the popularity of Java grow significantly. A lot of AJAX applications are making inroad. A lot of line of business applications have been created on that. So the biggest challenge is, well, if I have all the applications that I've written on Win32, the Win32 applications that I've written, what is the likelihood of those running in Windows 7? There's only one way to find out, and that costs money. And that is to test. To know that whether it runs or not. It might as well run on Windows 7, but you'll have to test it to understand that it runs, to get that peace of mind. So we looked at an environment, and this, by the way, we worked in conjunction with Gartner in developing this Windows 7 migration toolkit that they have published. We collaborated on that and extracted some of the data so that we can actually use it in our presentation here. And we actually have a calculator that's on our website also. It'll give you some options to plug in some numbers and get some assessment as to what Windows 7 migration cost might be. So we're looking at 5,000 desktops. You're migrating from Windows XP to Windows 7. The average cost of a new PC, as we used before, is about $1,000. The thing that we really care about is the application environment. So we look at what is the application environment. Total number of packaged application. So this would be your productivity application, your Adobe Reader, your Acrobat, your Photoshop, what have you, Internet Explorer, Mozilla. These are the type of packaged application. So on average, for a company of 5,000 users, roughly 200. That's our estimate. That has also been validated by Gartner based on the number of users, end users. We also look at the total number of custom applications. How many multi-tiered applications do you have? So this would be your Java application, .NET applications, your J2E applications, and so forth. You might also have some web-based multi-tiered applications that are also included in here. Roughly 50 we have assumed in this scenario. And applications per desktop is about 20. So my organization may have 200 packaged applications, but on my desktop, maybe I'm using 20. Maybe that's what I'm entitled to. On average, about 20 applications per desktop. So the impact of VMware View, when you migrate to Windows 7 with VMware View, you can save some money. You can save some effort. You can migrate it with a peace of mind. But before we even get into that number, let's look at what are the steps just for the Windows 7 migration. And this is not new to you, I'm sure. You have to, before you migrate, you have to do an audit. You have to know who has what. And a lot of customers today do not know who has what. You know, does Joe have XP Service Pack 3? I don't know. We have to audit. What kind of applications do they have? I don't know. We have to audit. So there's some effort that's needed to audit, to understand who has what. Then after you do that, you find out that, well, I know who has what, I've tested, and I find out certain applications don't work. So I have to remediate those applications. If it's a custom app, I can remediate. I have the source code. If it's a packaged app, I go to the ISV and say, well, you guys got to fix it because it doesn't run on Windows 7. Anyway, it requires some effort. In some cases, you'll find that ISV is no longer supporting that, or their release schedule does not line up with your Windows 7 migration schedule. You'll have to find a replacement. Then you have to acquire the hardware, you have to install OS drivers, you have to test, finally you have to deploy, and then you manage the whole thing again. And this is just Windows 7 migration cycle. So based on our calculator, we have estimated that on the audit phase, you can save approximately 30 to 35% savings. When you deploy VMware View and migrate to Windows 7. On the application space, you can save about 60% in terms of application remediation, and this is by virtue of virtualizing your applications. So you virtualize your applications, you put that in a bubble where it's self-contained, it's totally insulated from the operating system, so that you can actually port that into Windows 7. Then hardware, software, depending on how you virtualize, you can go thin client, you can repurpose your desktop. Your choice will actually dictate as to what kind of savings you can have. It also accounts for all the server, storage, all the infrastructure cost that needs to be accounted for. Finally, you install, test, and deploy. And throughout the steps, you can have significant amount of savings, and our calculator will actually step you through that if you're interested. So this is just to show you in terms of time. So for a 5,000 desktop with the assumptions that we have just shown here, roughly, you're looking at roughly, 93, well, let's look at the dollar amounts. About $10 million to migrate about 5,000 desktop, roughly 2,000. If you pick up Gartner's migration toolkit, you'll see it's more than that. Ours is a little bit more conservative because we have kind of scaled down certain assumptions. We think that you shouldn't have to pay that much, so that the model is a little bit more conservative, but it's more likely to be close to your actual cost. So roughly $10 million to migrate 5,000 desktop. So with View, and this is the cost of hosted virtual desktop. Roughly View, as you can see, with View, you can cut it down to roughly $4.6 million. What's interesting is that you not only save money, you are able to migrate much faster. So your disruption to your business, actually, you can cut it down by half. There is a calculator that I've been referring to. It's on the website. We are making an update to the website to incorporate Windows 7 estimate as well. Pretty simple, straightforward, easy to use. With 3 or 4 clicks, you can get an estimate. It's not going to do your total financial analysis. It's going to give you a ballpark. And as long as the estimates, the data that you put in are close to your actual data point, it'll give you a pretty close enough estimate as to what to expect. So finally, I wanted to just close my section with a quote from Michael Rose at IDC. And this is something that he actually said after they did the study with VMware View customers. If you're a large organization and you have done if you have done server virtualization, you ought to look at the hosted virtual desktops. So this is what the analyst said. But, let's hear from our customer. What did they go through when they deployed VMware View? What kind of benefits did they have? And for that, we have Josiah Baker here from Amway.
Hi. Thank you, guys. VMware asked me to be here because we've actually just pretty much worked our way through a VMware View deployment. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Amway. We're headquartered in Ada, Michigan. We have global operations in more than 80 countries around the world, 13,000 employees worldwide, and combined sales of, actually this year, we're getting closer to $9 billion. We make a lot of products, some of which you probably are aware of, some of them not. One of the latest ones that's actually, you'll probably see more frequently is wireless power, which is not up here, but the new Qi standard that's coming out is actually being pushed by Amway as well. And it was based off our water filter products that we've been using for about 8 years. What I'd like to tell you about is first, why did we go with View? What was our business challenge? What was the reason why we would even consider doing virtual desktops and change the norm? We were tasked with building a branch office in Costa Rica to consolidate our finance operations across all the Americas. We operate in most of the Latin American countries as well as the United States and Canada. And we had a very short time frame to do this. The business decided that they wanted to begin having users in production in Costa Rica within 16 weeks of when they announced this. And didn't really consult IT when they decided to do that. So I don't know, I'm sure none of you have ever had to deal with that. So, just try to be sympathetic. But we didn't have any time to figure out what we wanted to do. We didn't realize that, the scope of what they were trying to do until they announced it to everybody. And to make matters even more difficult, there was transitioning because we were moving positions from all over the Americas down into Costa Rica. So we had the political aspects to deal with as well. Many of the things that we looked at were, okay, if we're going to build a branch office in Costa Rica, we're going to build a data center down there too? Are we going to put servers down there? How are we going to give them the ability to do their jobs that they've currently done in Ada and then all these other countries around the world, and give them the same experience that they're used to, and do it in a manner that's cost effective and that's not going to disable our operations where they currently exist. So one of the things that we'd considered is if we do a traditional PC deployment, because we have some WAN applications or applications that are very sensitive to WAN traffic, very sensitive to high latency, and just from a lot of the testing that we did, we realized that just putting traditional PCs down there without building out a full data center to support all the line of business applications that we did would be impossible. So we had to look at our next target because we did not have enough time to build a data center in country. We wanted the data to be secure. It's our financial information, AP, payroll, AR, all these different finance functions, including analysis, tax, and that kind of thing. So One thing that we had to deal with is these users are very transaction-oriented. They use dual displays. They're flipping through images and documents very quickly. They expect things. In fact, it's almost like factory work in that they expect all the timing to always be the same. They're clicking through extremely fast. There's a lot of page flips, all kinds of changes, and we had to make sure that we put something in place that would actually support that. We had free trade zone, which was a blessing and a curse at the same time. We had to be very careful about how we got things into the country. Trying to procure anything in Costa Rica is a nightmare, and it costs twice as much. And also once we sent stuff down to the facility, we had to be right the first time because it can't leave the facility. We just have to donate it or destroy it. We also were going to deal with a limited IT on-site presence. We'd initially planned to have no IT professionals there. And this was to support a workforce of, at its completion, around 200 to 220 people. So we also needed to make sure that we provided a rich user experience so that the users really didn't know that they weren't on a traditional desktop, because we didn't have enough time to change the way that they did everything, to redo every application that they've had, and to differentiate and change expectations. So we had already done a proof of concept of VMware View, very light. We didn't get really any applications packaged. We didn't implement anywhere. It was really just kind of a sandbox to play around. We looked at VMware View because we had a lot of in-house experience with vSphere, and we have over 1,700 VMs and 100 hosts in our environment right now. And we're running, we've been running that for the last 5 years or so, and have had a lot of success with it. So this was kind of a natural choice. The other thing we looked at is how do we get over, our biggest limitation, which was no matter how much money we put towards, communications lines, we can't increase the speed of light. So we were, we ended up getting a pretty expensive connection down there, but we were able to get around 100 to 110 millisecond latency at best. So we had that to deal with. One reason we looked at VMware View is because they just incorporated the PCOIP protocol. And for us, this was a game changer because this allows us to do a very rich user experience to all the users that we need to provide it to, and do it in such a way that the results are tremendous. They get the LAN-like experience in another country, thousands of miles away. We needed multi-monitor support, and it had to be native, and PCOIP was perfect for that. We needed to simplify our desktop deployment management. How we'd currently done things is that everybody had admin rights. Everybody, had unique DSNs created on their computers in finance. Everybody had manually installed applications. We didn't have a good idea of what was out there. We actually had to do face-to-face interviews to figure out what everybody was doing. And then even then, there was a lot of things that weren't immediately caught, that were brought up once we already had a solution partially in place, that we had to quickly address and remediate. And this solution gave us the versatility to do that, and we were able to do it fairly quickly. We wanted to make sure that we were being efficient with disk space and storage space. We didn't do this for cost. We did this to enable what the business had asked us to do. We weren't trying to save money, but if we did, it would be nice. We also needed to make sure that we weren't wasting space. That's why we decided to go with View Composer, because if you're not doing link clones and stuff like that, it can get kind of unwieldy in the environment, and each VM that you add, increases the amount of disk commitment that you have. We also decided to do application virtualization with ThinApp, just from a manageability perspective. We wanted to make sure that all our applications were able to be packaged, and we wanted to put together an environment that was completely dynamic and assembled, every time you logged in. We used application virtualization to do that. So this is really kind of what we did. I like this slide because it kind of puts together what we tried to accomplish. What we did is we're actually using a non-persistent desktop pool, which VMware's changed the terminology yet again, so now it's stateless. We're using packaged virtualized applications. All the applications in the environment are packaged. We don't have any applications installed in the operating system image. Office is not installed. We don't even have any frameworks like Java or .NET, anything like that. That makes it extremely easy to manage because the only updates we have to apply are Windows updates, which in itself is a pain. But when you don't have Java and Adobe Reader and all those other things to deal with inside your image, it makes things a lot easier. So we packaged all our applications, Microsoft Office. We use Lotus Notes. We use a lot of other applications that we were all able to package. We also take the persona. If we're giving somebody a brand new desktop every time they log in, then logic would say that, well, they're probably going to have to change all their settings every time they come in. It's going to have a very generic field, and they won't be able to customize it, and so the user will resent that, especially if they've used a traditional PC before and expect that once they set something, it stays. So we decided to use persona management technology. Currently, we're using virtual profiles, and we've been using it before it was purchased by VMware. So basically what we're doing is we're taking all these things, we're breaking them all apart, and then every time you log in, we actually recompile them for you. So this is some nice little animation, I guess. But it also allows us to deliver this stateless but personalized desktop to a multitude of devices. In Costa Rica, we actually used Teradici-enabled zero-client devices, which have turned out to be great. And we also have users down there. We're able to provide such a good usage experience with VMware View that we have managers down there that we, because politics had to give them laptops, they actually use their laptops and then have requested the ability to have the View client so that they can actually log in to our virtual environment to get their work done because it's just so much faster than trying to do it over the WAN. So this is pretty much what we did as far as how our design goes together. We're on VMware View 4.01. Like I said, non-persistent desktop pool. We use virtual profiles, distributed location. So all our servers and hosts are in Ada, Michigan, and we're providing all our endpoint devices, which are located in Costa Rica, with a rich desktop experience. Every single one of our applications that we use in the environment is either a web application or it's packaged. We're using the Samsung NC190 Teradici-enabled PCOIP clients. We also implemented end-to-end user experience monitoring, which we found this to be very valuable because it gives you just a wealth of knowledge as far as what's going on in your environment. We have so much more visibility now than we ever did in the PCs. We can see, application not responding events. So we know before even users complain if there's a problem app, we know how long their login times are, which happen to be 30 seconds. That's pretty good, I think. We know, how many users are concurrently in the environment. Because we're giving a user a brand new desktop every time they log in, we can actually drill down by the user and then see all the desktops that they've actually been logged into, which would signify a session. And we've been in production since March 2010, so we've had about, and we put it in place right before that. So we've been going for a while on this and continue to increase our deployment. We've improved standardization of our applications. Some of the benefits that we've seen from this is because all our applications are packaged, we don't have any type of application incompatibility issues that we used to have before where, you'd have an application that runs Java 1.6, but then maybe a legacy application that runs Java 1.4, and you can't really have them both coexist on the system. They fight each other, just all kinds of nightmares trying to get it to work. We don't have that problem because we use ThinApp. We app link to the version of Java that we need, or, other plugins like .NET, that kind of thing. So, those problems are a thing of the past. Once we give somebody access to an application, it just works. If there's a problem and somehow, maybe the application sandbox got corrupted or something like that, in order to get a user back to basically like the fresh installed application, all we do is delete the sandbox. It's a 5-minute service desk call, if that, and they're good to go. It's like doing a reinstallation of the package or the application, but we don't have to send somebody out to the desk. It can be done by the service desk, and it doesn't actually happen that frequently. We have no servers in our branch office. We don't have any domain controllers. We don't have file or print servers. We don't have anything down there. We really could cut the link, sever ties, and we're done. If we needed to move to a different country, we could do that, and none of our data would reside there. We actually block all USB devices except for keyboards and mice, and they're blocked at the hardware level. So users aren't able to walk in with a USB stick, download our financials and move on. They're also not able to use webcams or anything like that. We could enable it, but we don't because it allows us to be a lot more secure. We have significantly reduced support calls because we're in a totally zero client environment. We haven't had any hard drive failures because there aren't really any hard drives to fail. We haven't had any blue screens of death ever. And application compatibility is a thing of the past. In fact, we actually don't even have any virus scanning software in our environment. It's just not there. We scan their data, their user data that's stored on the network on their home drive, and we scan the applications, but we actually don't have to have that inside the view environment. So that just really saves a lot of resources and headaches too. We've also had no issues with viruses or spyware. And if we did, worst case scenario, we could have everybody log out, it would delete all their desktops, they log back in and they're good to go. So, and that can happen pretty quickly. We spin up brand new desktops for everybody every time they log in, so we always have about like 15 to 20 waiting, but a desktop can get created in seconds, not minutes, so that's actually pretty amazing. We haven't run into any kind of issues with that. Because of all these things, we've actually been able to increase user productivity and uptime. We haven't actually done a study because we haven't finished the implementation yet. We're still moving more processes down there. But the business has come back to us and said the first few waves that we've put in are actually more productive than they were when they were based in their original locations, which is amazing given the fact that now their original locations are 110 milliseconds away and thousands of miles, but they're still getting the same or better type of experience. So right now, we're available for any questions and answers. If you guys have anything, just please let me know. I'll be happy to answer that. Ridwan will be up here too. There's a question in the back. Can you speak up, please?
How much bandwidth do you have to do this?
Right now, we have a 45 meg DS3.
How much is it utilized?
How many users? Right now, we have 70 concurrent users plus like 15 laptop users, I believe. We're not even close to saturating our link right now. Question over there?
How many applications do you have?
We have 60 packaged applications right now, and that's going to expand. You, sir?
Did you compare View with ZenDesktop before you deploy View?
We did do a POC of ZenDesktop, but to be fair, it was version 3, so it's not really, right now, I mean, anybody that's worked in this field has seen that both VMware and Citrix have been releasing new versions it seems like every few months.
Why do you go with View versus ZenDesktop?
Well, part of it was speed of implementation for us. Because we had a very large existing server infrastructure with VMware, it was the natural step. The other reason was because we were seeing better results with PCOIP versus ICA. And since that was our primary focus was enabling this, then that's what we had to go with.
Yeah, question?
You guys don't have a need for bidirectional audio?
We actually do, but not for this use case. We do for call center workers, and actually now that has been enabled by Teradici on the devices. We have the new firmware update. We're running 3.2, and that does actually support bidirectional. In addition, View 4.5, if you use that with a download from Teradici, you can actually have bidirectional audio working. So we do have soft phones in certain environments. In this case, it's only hard phones. So.
You had a question there.
In the PCO study, you talked about the power savings from the thin clients. Did you guys calculate the additional power that you needed for the additional server?
Yes. So that was the net. So if you have, let's say you have 100 desktops that you're running, so that 100 desktop will consume, let's say, like at 220 watts per hour with the monitor or LCD panel. If you were to replicate that 100 desktop in a virtual environment with 10 client, accounting for the server that you put on the data center to host to those desktops, you'll still be able to save somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 to $60 per desktop on an annual basis. So over its useful life, times 4 or times 5.
That was assuming XP as your
That's assuming XP as your OS. That's right.
Do you account for the cooling cost?
Absolutely, yes. So the cooling factor or the load factor is applied to both in the both environment.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate more on the spyware and the lack of antivirus?
Sure.
So, I mean, from like an IE perspective, are you packaging IE as well?
IE is not packaged, but our users don't have administrative access in the environment. We do keep it patched. In addition, the desktop is completely discarded every time they log out. So because of the combination of they don't have the ability to actually install anything, and we're deleting the desktop just in case it did collect something, the risk versus reward of having, McAfee or whatever, in the environment running, versus the chance that something would actually happen, which so far nothing's happened. And I would say in the period of time that we've been running it, that's probably a pretty good trade-off since it significantly increases the amount of desktops you can host.
What version of IE are you running?
Right now we're running IE7. And it's a Windows XP deployment if I didn't mention that before.
I would think in your ROI case study, though, I mean, the numbers would really skew if we were able to eliminate endpoint security out of the desktop. So, every user I know is buying, Semantic endpoint or McAfee or something like that. So if you're taking antivirus completely out of the equation through the way you've packaged it and locked it down, that's pretty significant.
Yeah, it's, and actually, this was recommended by our IT security department, so that was kind of shocking. Usually they're like, no, lock everything down. But in this case, they thought, well, based on how you're handling and managing this, and, in addition to the fact that we've locked down USB devices, so that's another vector that we don't have to worry about, the recommendation was don't put it on there. We can save some money. And so, yeah, you're right.
You mentioned hardware lockdown on USB.
Yep.
That's something that the Samsung terminal had as a feature?
Yeah, well, the Teradici chip, there's a lot of different devices that use that. Wise has got the P20. I believe LG is coming out with a monitor that's got the chip inside of it. And that's something that all of those, anything with basically the hardware zero client, anything, those can do that. So, yep.
Just to follow up on the security thing, you mentioned that you were scanning the user data.
Yep.
So what are you using to scan the user data?
Well, right now it's actually on a server file share. So then the server that it's hosted on is actually doing the scanning for it.
What's the end user OS you're provisioning the templates of XP or 7?
Right now it's Windows XP.
Okay. And there are really significant, security enhancements in moving to IE8 and UAC on, even if the user doesn't have the instant rights in XP. So have you tested any of the performance hit that you get by moving those to Windows 7?
Well, we haven't been able to test Windows 7 in the environment because, as some of you probably already know, Virtual Profiles, which is now a part of VMware, doesn't actually support Windows 7. So we weren't able to get a fully functioning POC to really do that. Our plan is actually to move to IE8 in the virtual environment that we have right now with Windows XP, and to do that by utilizing ThinDirect and ThinApps. So we are planning to move that direction, but right now some of our apps just were not certified to run on that, and we couldn't get around that until this just released technology. Yep.
Are you running at user level or power user?
User level. They're not even power users. They really can do nothing unless we allow them to, but it's worked out fine. There haven't really been any complaints. They can they can customize their desktop, save their background, move their icons where they want, do stuff like that. Because we've packaged all the applications, and they have there's no justification for them trying to install iTunes or something on their desktop. We're able to go around that. But you might run into more flack when you're working with a traditional user and you're taking out their PC and putting in a thin client. So this may be an ideal case to do that because we had a new set of users. They didn't have those expectations, and the business was completely behind us on locking that down because in their mind, it's dollars. It's productivity. If they're wasting their time, they're not being productive. So we were able to, keep that from being an issue.
There's a question in the back.
Sorry, maybe I misunderstood, but what you're just talking about with the users being able to customize their background, or I know for us, even for me, just saving files on my desktop is a quick thing. But when
Yep, so what's happening is we're using virtual profiles to save those settings and kind of pull them out of the desktop so they're saved on the network. And then when you log off, your desktop's destroyed. When you log back in, a new desktop is basically dynamically composed to you. We take the operating system, any of the applications, and we're using Active Directory to determine which applications you get. So those applications are applied as part of the login, and then basically your profile and any settings that you set, those are also then layered on top of that. Well, those are actually saved in the application sandbox with ThinApp, unless you set it up to not persist. So because we packaged all our applications, we didn't even have to worry about application settings because the applications aren't able to make settings in the OS. The ThinApp tricks them into thinking that they are and removes our requirement for having administrator rights.
Question?
How many IT personnel does it take to manage infrastructure?
Well, we have our service desk. They're able to handle most of the calls, but because we're still rolling out, right now I work on it almost full time. One of my coworkers is actually here, and he handles most of the application packaging. Getting it, I'm not going to say that getting everything up and working is easy. It's not. That's where your huge time investment is getting everything in place. But what we've really seen is once you get it working, it just stays working, at least if you do it like we did. So then all you have to do is you're spending your time improving the environment, looking at new technologies to implement to make things even smoother. That's why VMworld's been really exciting for me because I've seen the stuff that VMworld's coming, or that VMware's coming out with, and I'm like, hey, I can implement that, and I actually have time to do it. So, but it has been a significant investment. I would say, probably with the size of the environment we have, 3 to 4 FTEs. The thing is though that scales. Like, we could massively increase it and not really have to increase the staff that we have supporting it.
So actual maintenance is relatively small number of people. I mean, the work you're primarily focused on is continual improvement and rollout. So
Yep.
actual maintenance seems to, like I say, it seems to be working pretty well.
Once a month for patches, just making sure nothing blows up, but nothing has. It's incredibly stable. So getting it all up and running was a challenge, but now that it's in place, it doesn't really need that much. Especially if you have great testing procedures, which we didn't start with, probably like a lot of people don't, but we kind of worked our way up to. And so now we're able to, before we do changes to the system, we have a really good change control process.
There's a couple of... Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Because you think about virtual PDI and so on is that because the desktops are all centralized, and so if something catastrophic happens, it means it could affect many of the users versus today, of course, it's distributed. It may only be a few. I was wondering what your thoughts on that and prevention of any catastrophic event.
Yeah, well, right now we are co-located in 2 data centers, and we're doing hot and cold. And our turnaround time for that size of failure is I believe 12 hours. That being said, it hasn't happened, and if a failure that large happened, we would probably be hurting everywhere in the business and not just in our View implementation. And so that's basically the priority that our business has put on it.
What happens when the network cable at Costa Rica gets cut?
We do have a backup line over VPN, and Teradici, the PCIP protocol is smart enough to scale down the user experience, so we still can do that. It'll basically use all the bandwidth that you allow it to do to provide the best experience to the users. But as congestion goes up, as it detects a lot of network activity, or it detects the size of the pipe is decreased, it actually scales it down.
That ring in the Caribbean that goes to Costa Rica, which is like the main high-speed network, and that thing gets cut every couple of years. Some boat anchor cuts it.
That would be a bad thing. But because of this, if we wanted, we could send users home, and they could log in from home, assuming that the entirety of Costa Rica is not blackout. But if that's the case, I don't think there's anything we can really do. But we just got to hope that doesn't happen. That being said, we could relocate to another country if we had to, pretty easily.
There's a question there.
Yeah, I believe our carrier is Verizon. And it really just depends on every country that you go into, but we have a point-to-point DS3, so there are certain SLA, and I can't really get into any more of that without being ignorant, so I'm going to leave it there. We have an excellent network team, and they handle that, so.
You could expand this to your users in the U.S., this is just for the remote users?
Well, right now it's just for the remote users. We're looking for opportunities to do that. We actually are ready to do that. We're waiting on the business to allow us to do that. But this has been a very strong use case because it's been so successful there. Mostly politics. There's lack of vision outside of this as far as what exactly we want our future desktop to look like. Because it's not one size fits all. You're going to have to do things different for every user type. In this case, we're able to be very locked down, dynamic, and that worked great for what we're trying to support. But that's not going to fit every user case. And because when we started in the U.S., we're going to have to address those challenges and just the person aspect of change, where people can do whatever they want at home. And unfortunately, in the past, they've been able to pretty much do whatever they wanted at work. And to take that away, take their admin rights away and bring them down to user level, not let them have their personal applications, but only applications that we've packaged and provided, that requires baby steps and being very careful. So we're working on that. Right now, we're looking for low-hanging fruit, so customer service would be a great example where we may be able to enable a work at home or just do this because we have a lot of IT issues in that department, a lot of support required, and they all pretty much do the same thing, so they'd be a great fit. Anything else?
Does if you support UV devices like smart cards, if they are sensors?
So Teradici just announced that they are supporting, and in 4.5 I believe that they are supporting smart card devices. And there are a lot of USB devices that are supported. But our use case, we haven't really had to do any of that. So what you can do is you can blacklist everything and then whitelist only the devices that you've approved, which is kind of nice. So if you had like one type of encrypted USB device that you want to allow users to use, you could allow that and block every other USB device or mass storage device if you wanted. So
one last question. We have time for one last question, and we can actually carry on afterwards. We have to leave this room. Yes, please.
We could and should have done that in our existing user population. We're not doing that, and we're working towards it. The reason we were able to do all that with VMware View is because in order to be able to do that easily, so for example, if you're taking away admin rights, a lot of applications require that you have admin rights even to be able to run them. Not just install, but to be able to run them in a PC environment. So you would need to package the application in some way in a lot of cases. So we use ThinApp to do that, and that's pretty much the number one thing that removed our requirement for admin access. You're right. A lot of those same principles would apply to a physical environment as well. The main reason why we didn't do that here is because of the WAN and latency issues, where applications would just not run. Like we tested with PCs down there. We had an application that took 7 minutes to launch. And on the LAN it was seconds. And in the virtual environment, it's seconds. That's just not acceptable, and that wouldn't have would not have flown. So we didn't really have a choice as far as that goes, but you're right, we could do that in our standard environment. And in some cases, if you're moving towards a VDI, you actually want to do that first, so that it's not such a big change. You don't want to change everything all at once for them. If you can, maybe first start replacing users' applications with virtual applications, and then pull away their admin rights at a later date. You're moving toward having the flexibility to be, hosted virtual desktops or any combination of those above technologies.
Cool. Did you have one last?
Oh, terminal server? Yeah, we actually have done that for call centers, but
Not by this case, I mean, you would have the same, you avoid latency, you would avoid security issues. Why should you look at that?
Well, the reason that we didn't do terminal servers is because the user experience isn't as rich. I think we can all agree on that. In addition to that, it's a shared desktop, so in that case, if one user manages to screw up the terminal server, it's down for everybody. In this case, if a user manages to screw up their virtual desktop, it's down for them and nobody else. And then they can just log out, log back in, and everything's refreshed. With a terminal server, if they bring it down, you've got admin staff there trying to fix it furiously. And that's been our experience with it. A lot of the same things you can do in a terminal server environment, and you may incorporate a terminal servers for certain applications in this environment. Right now we don't need to do that, but we could.
Great. Well, thank you very much.